think we're gonna go for it. Hello, everybody. Can you hear me? Everything? Every good? Okay, awesome. I just want to welcome you all to Roble's centenary celebration. Woo! Awesome. My name is Brian Aldana, and I'm here with Ramesh, sorry. And we are residential assistants, or RAs, here at Roble. We actually both lived here, our frosh year as well. I remember coming into the door my first day, going up in the middle stairs, and then realizing that it stops after 2B. And I lived all the way down in 3C. So I had to come all the way back down with my family and all the luggage, down the hall and up the stairs again. And so now we are back here again in Roble, and you can say that we really love it here.
Great. So I've been speaking to some people outside. We have some former RFs here, former Roble residents, but I think some people would appreciate a little bit more context about what Roble is today, at least. So Roble is the oldest undergraduate dorm still in operation at Stanford. It's also the second largest undergraduate residence on campus, hosting about 300 residents. As a four-class dorm, Roble's home to undergraduates of all 4 years, 50% of whom are freshmen, meaning Roble houses the largest number of frosh in a single residence. Roble also sits in West Campus, near several other four-class and upper-class houses, as well as the new Roble Field, which you may have seen or perhaps parked underneath, and Roble Arts Gym. Roble itself is organized into 11 hallways, 2 of which house only upper-class residents. The other 9 house all 4 classes, and they're organized into 4 wings. So we have the A wing, the B wing, the M wing, and then the disconnected except for the first floor C wing.
Yeah. So Roble as a physical space, we have this lovely theater that you all are in here. It's been multi-purpose for many years, but now we have a new space, the Makerspace. I don't know if you guys were able to check it out. We have a live feed streaming right now, in which we have a lot of materials for people to be creative, like sewing, a 3D printer, painting supplies, and all that jazz, fun stuff. And we also have the C wing that's disconnected, obviously, and then we also have rooms with sinks. Isn't that lovely? It's like something you don't think about, but when you have a sink in your room, it's lovely. So that's a little bit about Roble as a physical space.
Yeah. And then finally, I just wanted to mention a new program that Roble has been hosting for the last few years, which is called the Roble Living Laboratory for Sustainability at Stanford. And so as part of that project, several different initiatives have been pioneered. One, probably most visibly, is the garden, which you may have passed as you entered into Roble. The focus this year is on trying to change the behavior of students in terms of thinking more sustainability and kind of having that enter the thoughts and discussions of the community here at Stanford. So without further ado, we'll pass it over to Jeff to introduce the panel.
How about a round of applause for Raja and Brian? Thanks. Thank you. Thanks. You guys want to come up here? Jim, why don't you sit in that seat and Laura sit in the center? Oh, we actually don't need this, right? Thank you. Hello, good afternoon. How are you? Excellent. Thank you all for being here. And you know, there's an overflow room, so we have a whole bunch of people we can't see, but who can see us. Let me just ask you, as I'm doing right now, to turn off your phones if you haven't, or at least turn them down if you haven't done that. And I'm going to be really quick here, and we actually are going to be quick here because what we've decided is that we're not going to stay here for 55 or 60 minutes and yak at you. We're not going to kind of give you a communal lecture about Roble's history. We're going to engage in a historical exploration together about Roble's history. That's the point of, we're going to lean on you as much as you perhaps believe that you're going to lean on us to understand Roble's history. So let me just start with a couple questions. Raise your hand if you lived in Roble. Wow. Excellent. Kudos to you. And raise your hand if you didn't live in Roble, but you had some association with Roble or today have some association with Roble. So that means that there's no one who hasn't raised your hand, right? And I'm assuming there are a lot of hands going up in the other room. That's fabulous. That's why we are here. I want to just sort of frame this a little bit, and I'm going to take a couple minutes, and then I'm going to introduce Laura and Jim, and then we're going to kind of jump into this. But you probably know as well as I that Roble's history has been messy and rich. It's been politically fraught. It has been seismically interesting, and I mean that literally. And it has been, and we're going to come back to this theme over and over, it has been socially groundbreaking. We're going to try to touch on all of that over about the next hour. I want to just say some thank yous before we start. First of all, I want to thank a number of people at Stanford who are funding what is not a cheap event. You see a lot of fancy equipment around you, and we couldn't have done this without a number of people helping us here. And I want to thank a bunch of people whose heavy lifting made this look really easy. Becky Bull, please stand up. Becky Bull, Roble's other resident fellow and my life partner, who's in the other room. Quincy Mingo, Roble's program associate. Quincy was around here. Maybe he's in the other room too. Okay. DeAndre Thompson, assistant dean in residential education. They're all somewhere else. Leslie Kim and Charlotte Glasser of the Stanford Historical Society. You may clap. They're right back there. And Shayna Levine. Shayna, where are you? Shayna, raise your hand. Shayna Levine, who lived in Roble last year and lives in Roble by choice again this year, and who spent a lot of hours in Stanford's archives researching old yearbooks and photographs to come up with some pretty terrific photographs of Roble's history. And Shayna's going to chime in a little bit and give you a few impressions of what she found, because what she found and what she didn't find are equally interesting. I obviously want to thank Laura and Jim, both of whom got their doctorates at Stanford and who are, I don't need to tell you, extraordinarily thoughtful historians. They're thoughtful absolutely about what history teaches us definitively about the past, but I think more importantly, at least to my mind, and what I hope we'll touch on more today, they're thoughtful about what history doesn't definitively tell us about the past, rather asks us to interpret from our own very own experiences and points of view. Laura has one of the coolest job titles I have ever heard of. In addition to being Stanford's Director of Heritage Services, she is Stanford's University Archaeologist. She spent her early years as an archaeologist working for the Ohlone tribe, which at the time was excavating the bodies of tribal members discovered near construction sites in the area so that those bodies could be reburied. She oversees a number of archaeological sites on the Stanford campus, and as you're about to see, has spent a lot of time looking into Roble's history and is a font of insight about Stanford's history more broadly. Jim is the Edgary Robinson Professor in U.S. History. His writing and his research are incredibly broad about the history of the United States, the history of Africa, the history of the relationship between the United States and Africa, and more broadly, and I think we'll touch on this today, about the way that societies of all sorts tell the stories about their pasts. Jim's 2006 book, Middle Passages, African American Journeys to Africa, 1787 to 2005, was a finalist for the Pulitzer Prize. Jim also, near and dear to Becky's and my hearts, is faculty director of an institution at Stanford called Stanford's Office of Residential Programs, in which Jim does a lot of very thoughtful work to deepen the intellectual life in Stanford's dorms. Jim has been an invaluable, creative, enthusiastic, and pretty dogged guy in helping us here. And a lot of what you see in Roble is thanks to the efforts of a number of people, centrally Jim. So I want to just point out a couple of things, and then we will be done. I want to just say two things about what's been wonderful for Becky and me in terms of our time over the past 4 years as resident fellows here. We've been really lucky to be in Roble at a time when there's been a lot of physical change in this building. So Raja and Brian told you about the history of this building. I just want to point out a couple of things that would not have been here were you here, say, 5 years ago. I want you to take a look at that mural, and if you're in the other room, I want you to take a look at the mural when you're done. This mural was painted by a woman who at the time was a freshman in Roble 3 or 4 years ago with a grant that she got. You should look at the Makerspace. You should look at a kind of a park out here. You should absolutely look at the garden, and you should understand Roble as a kind of grouping of micro communities. This is a very big place, and what's attractive to Becky and me and the students who live here is that this is maybe the most diverse place on the Stanford campus. This is, I think it's fair to say, the closest undergraduate residence that Stanford has to the world. There's essentially everything in this building, which is both a challenge and a wonder. And we're going to jump in right now. I'm going to not thank all the offices I wanted to thank on the Stanford campus, but suffice it to say that lots of people have given money, have given emotional support to allow us to do what we're doing here today. And without further ado, let's talk about what we're here to talk about, which is the past of this place. So, Laura, let's start with you.
Starting with Jim.
You want to start with Jim?
I'm going to be brief.
Go. You be
Okay.
what I was not. Go ahead.
Thanks for having me. You know, one of the things I often say, I was racing in here a little bit late because I was just speaking to the faculty senate, trying to explain to them why actually residential experience matters and why it's integral to Stanford and why it is, in my opinion, the kind of lowest hanging fruit in terms of the quality of education we deliver to undergraduate students, which is to say, the place where we can, with a minimum of resources, but with thoughtful deliberation, actually dramatically improve the quality of a Stanford education by simply recognizing the ways in which most of what we aspire to produce in a Stanford student, qualities of reflectiveness, tolerance, an ability to function comfortably in diverse environments, leadership, and also the ability to be led. All of those things are things that actually students are modeling, learning about more in some fashion in their residences than when they pass through our classrooms. These are in some sense the laboratories of the university. And we should be more attentive to them, and I'm very happy to say that I think the university is awakening to that. One of the things that I often suggest as a thought experiment is, okay, why don't we just shut it down? Why don't we just take, they pay me a substantial sum of money plus benefits. Why don't you just tape my lectures once, put them all on the web? Why are we bothering to pay all this money to house people, to feed people, give faculty salaries year after year? And the question, I ask it only half facetiously because some of our peers are in fact moving onto various digital platforms. The fact of the matter is that we believe that something precious happens by virtue of coming here. A Stanford education, what that means not only during the 4 years here, but what it means in the totality of your life, is simply inconceivable to us without that thought. And this university should have the resources and the vision at this moment in particular, when universities are, I think, at the beginning of some fairly existential challenges, to be able to say that we believe in the values of these kinds of institutions. Yeah, we cost a lot of money, but we think something precious happens when you come here. I mean, I really do think Stanford should be a model of what a 21st century residential university is. And I think in some ways that goes right back to the founding of this university. Jane Stanford, from the outset, was quite explicit about it. And the founding grant says, in its nature, residential. And she went on to say that what she imagined Stanford was a place that would combine the kind of modern research university of Germany, in particular Johns Hopkins, with something of the feeling of a small college in which, as she put it, faculty and students will know one another by name. So I think that where we are sitting here, and when we are sitting here, is quite precious not only in Stanford's history, but what its future might become. I want to say very little about Roble itself because Laura's much better equipped. I have a student, a PhD student, who's just finishing an incredible PhD on the history of concrete, which sounds boring, but you know what? It is the single most ubiquitous material of this particular historical epoch. And when archaeologists start digging, soon they are going to find the second nature made out of concrete. Not this building, but the original Roble and the original Stanford Museum were pioneering buildings, I learned from reading this guy's dissertation, because they used steel reinforcements in concrete buildings. And it was a radical thing to do at the time. They still had to dress them up to make it look like they were stone, but they didn't fall down in 1906. And so I thought that was pretty cool. Second thing, and I'm sure all of you know this, the original Roble, which was along Sarah Mall, which will, very shortly, pending a few negotiations with the US Post Office, no longer be Sarah Mall, but be Jane Stanford Way. The original Roble was also a woman's dorm. One of the things that is spectacular about Stanford's history was this was from its outset a small d democratic university. And many of the qualities that define it, its irreverence, the fact that if you have a good idea, I don't care if you're a sophomore or a Nobel Prize winner, tell me about your idea. its openness to diverse communities. We're bred in the bone of this place, and that's relevant in the case of Roble because from the outset this was a co-educational institution. It was also open to members of different races at a time when that was rather unusual. So what's fascinating about Roble, not only the original one that was constructed, but then this one whose centenary we are celebrating today, was it was a women's dorm, so they made it different. And Roble still has a kind of abundance of communal space that makes it utterly unique. And it has that because actually this was for women. And women would entertain here. And so they created various kinds of parlors and places to sit that are actually virtually absent in the rest of the university. So we have in some ways repurposed those. We no longer think of a parlor like this as an exclusively domestic province for young women. We no longer have a person, and she was, you'll probably remember her name, known to generations as an utterly ominous person who was checking women in. They had to be in by 9 a.m.
Shayna has a picture
9
on the
p.m.
bulletin board. Yeah.
Woe betide you if you got home at 9:02. We no longer do that, but there's a weird way in which the physical infrastructure that we've inherited, we have continued to live into and to modify even as it has modified us. And then that leads to really the final point that I want to make, and this is in some ways, just a tribute to Jeff and Becky. It's been easy to support this institution of roles and of this particular residence because we've had an exceptionally committed couple of RFs who actually conceptualized this idea of Roble as a living laboratory on sustainability. And this was fascinating and very un-Stanford. When you talk about how do we make residences at Stanford sustainable, you are immediately in conversations about Green Dorm, Biodome 3. We're going to use technology to, we'll be drinking our own waste. It will be like hermetic. It will be the most cutting edge place ever designed.
You don't know what's for dinner.
Exactly. Okay. Cutting edge place in terms of sustainability ever conceptualized, right? That's how Stanford does things. And yet, the vast majority of physical spaces in which we live and will continue to live for a very long time are buildings which were not built to those standards, which are still here, the built environment that we inherit. And the ability to produce some new cutting-edge biodome is actually, in terms of the health of our planet, far less significant than developing new ways of repurposing the buildings that we are in. And having RFs who recognized that and who embraced it as a vision and who actually decided that we were going to start teaching engineering classes here in this dorm, in that seminar room, and that the subject would be this place. And that students would actually learn about, they would do life cycle analysis, they would study what was coming in, what was going out, they would deal with the difficult challenges that engineers often deal with about, okay, what are best practices and what can we practically do? And how do we balance various things? One of the things, for example, in terms of the energy inflow and outflow, these are not the windows that you would put in, but they are historic windows. So how do you actually balance your commitment to historic preservation, which is not only a matter of ethical judgment, it's also a matter of public policy and law. And to me, it is just an utter inspiration to see the ways in which students are actually not just sitting in some classroom on, where they're taking a course on sustainable product design and then coming home and doing whatever they do. They're actually understanding in really intimate ways the ways in which sustainability is something that actually happens not in the classroom, but in the lives that we lead. So I find that quite inspirational and quite consistent with what this institution, this Roble, has been and its capacity to continue to evolve, to grow, and to surprise us. So I hope that we can all get together on the 200th anniversary because I think it'll still be standing, and I'm suspecting that some very interesting people will be here to join us. So thank you.
So Laura's been doing some really fascinating research into the history of Roble, and we had a call, I guess it was yesterday, and I was just dumbfounded at what I learned about this place through Laura's research. So give us a little insight into that.
I confess that most of what I knew about Roble was architectural history, and I was more interested in social history. I had a loose idea that there was something special about the Roble women early in Stanford's history. And so after a really fun meeting with Shayna where we went through some old yearbooks, I then dove into the Stanford Daily Archive online, which is digitally searchable online, and it's really easy to search. And I typed in Roble Hall, and I started reading all these articles. And I started the year the dorm opened, and I kept going forward. And what I discovered in that version of history was that a lot of things that we think of as the institutional product of residential education, top-down design by smart people about residential education, were actually student initiatives inside Roble Hall. So you know how we welcome the frosh, right? And we do all this crazy stuff, and we've got banners, and we've got balloons. This started at Roble Hall with there was something called the Roble Club, which was a democratic institution. The students elected leaders
a small
of the club.
D democratic institution.
Small D democratic.
Yeah.
It is also the beginning of student activity fees.
Huh.
So to join the club, you paid a fee. And they did a thing for decades that was called the Jolly Up. I don't make this up. The freshman Jolly Up. And it really is the origin of the notion that freshmen should be brought into the community with fun and with humor. And instead of being, as they were unfortunately at the men's dorm, hazed into community, they came here and they were welcomed with funny costume parties and weird activities. And what as I described to you, a surprisingly intentional way that these women students developed systems. They developed a sponsorship system, which was essentially mentoring. They did this themselves, the club, the leaders, and you applied to the leadership of the club to be a mentor. You didn't get paid for that, right? You just said, I want to stay in Roble Hall, and I want to be a mentor to next year's freshman women. They developed this on their own. There was no dean of residential education saying, wouldn't mentoring be great? They did this out of their own hearts. And they did it intentionally to form community. Some of that, as I learned as we went into the 1930s, existed in a uniquely Stanford opposition to Greek life. And so fraternity and sorority life explode in social importance on American campuses in the 20s and 30s and 40s. Many Greek societies come to the campus. There are, however, never enough Greek societies to house all the students. And so there's the rush and the pledging and this highly selective, exclusive process. And the Roble women objected to this, the notion that there were winners and losers, and that you got selected because your mother had been in the sorority, or you had beautiful clothes because your father was rich, or you were pretty, or whatever it was, and that you weren't being judged on your merits as a citizen of Stanford or as an intellectual woman or whatever it was. And so they had what was called the Roble Revolt. And there was a year in 1938 where the Roble women refused to pledge. And so, which was the beginning of the end of sororities.
Was what year?
Stanford. This is 38.
38.
And so it was the beginning of the end, actually, of the sorority system at Stanford in that time period, was the Roble women saying, this hurts our community. And so I was really astonished in reading through the many years of Roble Hall history in the pre-coeducation period, how the Roble Hall women held the campus to a higher standard. There's a controversy about the big game bonfire, which they built in the Lagunitas Lake bed. And in this time period, football was king on campus. Pop Warner had just come. They were very excited. And the big game bonfire event took a whole week to build the bonfire, to do all this stuff. And so there was this drunken revelry going on right over the berm in the lake. And the women of Roble wrote a letter to the editor of the Daily and said, this seems like sort of a waste of time and a distraction. Couldn't we do this in one day? We're trying to study over here. And of course, they have a curfew. They can't go out there and participate in this revelry. And the editors of the Daily described them as hysterical freshman girls. And the women of Roble wrote a blistering reply on the subject of their being hysterical. And so they were holding the campus to a standard. The men said, let's just cancel classes for a week. And the Roble women were like, that's not what I paid here to do, came here and paid to do, right? And so I was really impressed by the level of student initiative and leadership and their sense that Stanford should be that place that Leland and Jane Stanford wanted to do. Jane Stanford was particularly concerned about elitism. She was particularly concerned about privilege and about any kind of social class distinctions among students, which did emerge early on in the campus. And the Roble women were the opposition to that, frankly were the Encina men, the people who chose to live in dormitories as opposed to adopt Greek life, really were the proponents of that kind of egalitarian ethos at Stanford. And Roble Hall really is the center of that.
So in a minute, we're gonna go to you because I'm itching to hear from everyone who raised your hand. But I want to ask you to fast forward a generation and talk about that egalitarian spirit and how it manifested itself in the late 60s and the 70s in Roble.
You know, what's a little bit hard, I talked to some of my friends in the ethnic theme houses. And you know, Roble certainly was, it becomes coeducational. Somebody here was 68, 69. And the first concentration of African-American students and residents happened here as a micro-community, as you would describe it. And
first self-selected concentration.
Self-selected concentration of African-American students who then got their own house, Ujima, at Lagunita the following year. The Native American students, I think it wasn't a theme house, it was a
priority house.
Priority house. We're here in there hopping around before they got their own house at Mawekmet Taruk. This was a deeply experimental space. One of the first coeducational dorms at Stanford, a place that had enough room and enough heart to say, let's experiment with these ethnic theme houses. There was a proposal that instead the student body of Roble should have the same demographics as the student body at large. They were very intentionally trying to deal with how to be a more welcoming and diverse campus in a residential community.
In fact, there was a proposal, and it's a question of some dispute about what came of it, because I've had some Roble alumni tell me they lived in it. Others tell me that it never happened. But at the time, the percentage of Stanford, we're talking in the late 1960s, early 1970s, was 93% white. And so one of the proposals was to create a community that would be 93% not white. And so one of the couple of the people who told me about this, I'm sure that those numbers are probably not accurate, but you know, he and some of his friends who were white made a purposeful decision to actually live in a community in which they would be a minority, which is something that very few white Americans, I mean, to this day, let alone at that time, would have ever experienced. So, I mean, again, I think it speaks to the ways in which this kind of community just has this kind of extraordinary spirit. And we'd love to hear, the room is full of stories. We'd love to hear them.
Do you all know why this place is called Roble? And by the way, why it's properly pronounced not
Roble. Yeah, Roble.
Roble. Does anyone know, who speaks Spanish in here? Does anyone know what the word means? Oak.
It's an oak.
Right. It's a particular kind of oak that grows broadly in California, but more specifically in this region of California. So, fun fact. I'm smiling this huge, big smile inside because I wish that every one of the 300 Roble students could hear about the history of experimentation. They can because we're recording this and they will be able to watch it. But it's extraordinarily, I think, validating. Really, really exciting to someone who lives in this building now to hear about the experience of experimentation and small d democracy in this place. Okay, so enough from us. Tell us some stories. Who lived here? you get the first bit. I will tell you just it's been really interesting to see how history disagrees about the history of this building. It's been very, very difficult to weave together even a couple of paragraphs about this place because we see conflicting versions even of the apparently most basic facts. So tell us something. You had your hand up, I think. Tell us your name and when you lived here and then a little more.
So my name's Judith Kays, and I was Gretchen Schultz when I was a freshman here. And my freshman, I lived in 2A center of the what was then a 3-girl suite. And one of my roommates is one of my closest friends still. I was the maid of honor in her wedding. The residential campus was probably the greatest experience of my undergraduate experience at Stanford. And I just have always felt so amazingly lucky to have been an undergraduate here. And then I lived here as a sponsor. When you talked about how early that started, that blew my mind because it was then run by the Dean of Women's Office. And we did have somebody checking us in when we came in the door.
What class were you? Forgive me if you said it.
Oh, sorry, I meant to say, I was the class of 57, so I came here as a freshman in 53, and then I was a sponsor in 56. And then we were kind of a combination big sister RA. And the idea was there was a senior girl who stayed for 1 semester, and the junior sponsor stayed for 2 quarters, and the idea was to help the girls along. But when you mentioned about the rebellion thing, or at least independent, we tried as sponsors. There was no good psychological services on campus. None. And I mean, the idea was you're pregnant, good, you're expelled. I mean, that was how things were done. We couldn't wear slacks beyond the post office. You could not, I was mentioning that to you earlier. You had to wear skirts. I mean, nobody has any idea what it was like in the 50s, what a constrained societal, what the mores were. Anyway, moving right along, right. We tried desperately to get help for some, and we had some real, problems with some of our girls who really needed some to continue and be happy at school. And we simply tried to suggest that they did have a psychiatric service at the Palo Alto Clinic, and that was it. And there were no counseling services on campus at all. So we had a lot of responsibility, and then some of the things we couldn't handle. So that was something that really generated. We even went to the president of the university and to the board of trustees about this, another sponsor and I, but nothing happened until much later in the years. Wow. So that's my little tale. But Roble was fantastic. And it was gorgeous and elegant, and where you're sitting now was a beautiful dining room, and there was one on the other side, too.
Do you remember what night was lamb chop night?
No, but it was fish night on Fridays, and we all got the hell out of there.
We got Roble alums together, and we were told Wednesday night was lamb chop night with mint chutney. Does that ring true?
I don't remember that.
Okay.
Sorry.
So listen, who was in Roble? You were class of 57. And if you're in the other room and you were in Roble and you want to join the conversation, I don't think we have the technological capacity to let you join here, but run out the hallway and come in this room. So who was here in the 40s? Anyone? Anyone here prior to the 50s? Who else was here in the 50s? Raise your hand. So one more would you want to jump in? Would you like to jump in?
I also was in, did you call your suite the Bible suite? No.
Oh, say that for the microphone. That's great.
All right. I'm saying that I was in that 3-room unit, and it was 3 center that goes across. And 2 center also had this same deal. When Roble was built, I think the girls, some of them, had visitors, their mothers or their friends or something. So these 3 little rooms in a separate little hall. I went off the main, 3 center. You go off in a little hall, and here's 3 little bedrooms and a bathroom and a big closet at the other end. We all use the same closet. So these on 3 center, they were named Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John.
I
and
heard
there
this.
It was.
Yeah, I heard this. Yeah. Please go ahead. Yeah.
Well, we liked it. I mean, we had our own bathroom. It was quieter back in there. We were 1 person to a room. Of course, we could only fit a bed, a chest, and a desk. But it worked. Entered in 49 and graduated in 53. And I was lucky in the draw. I wanted a row house. As leaving Roble, I went directly into Durand. I drew a low number and was in Durand 3 years. And so it was great.
Listen, there's a legal pad going around, and you absolutely must. I said before that you may, but now you must sign this legal pad. I had no idea that this is the kind of repository of Roble institutional history that it is. So we're absolutely going to keep you all together in terms of email. So please, please, please sign before you go. So let's move to the 60s. Who just to
There's
get
another
through?
hand, but there's, I think, another
Yeah,
hand.
but okay. So one more, go ahead, please. Yeah.
Oh, wait. Mid-80s. And Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John.
Introduce yourself.
Oh, sorry, I'm Ann Porteous, and we were resident fellows from 84 to 90, 91, something happened. We were also part of the transition when this building was about to fall down, and we had to be evacuated, and then we came back to open it up. But the Bible suite is still in existence in the mid-80s. So I don't know if is it still existing?
No, I mean not.
Nobody
not
talks
called
about
that.
Matthew,
Yeah,
Mark,
but
Luke,
you
and
know,
John.
we could resuscitate anything, right? Right. So wait, Kate. So we have another RF. Kate, will you just say hi? You want to say anything?
I just wanted to say hi to Anne. Good to see you again.
Kate, you were RF when?
2006 to 2010, I think.
Huh?
And it's a lot of fun. The student who's doing the photographs out there, I instantly started naming some of the kids in the photographs, so I'll come back and add to that. But I wrote a story about the history of Roble for Stanford Report. And then I posted the story, and a lot of the students that we lived with responded. And I wrote that any story for me about Roble is a love story, that I absolutely loved and still do this residence. It's very special. My son, Miles, grew up here. And I'm so thrilled that you're marking the anniversary this way, so thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so who was here in the 60s? So who wants to say something about the 60s? Yeah, we have a microphone. Brian, thanks.
So I came in, excuse me, my name's Jeannie Sigmund. It was Jeannie Howard. At that time, I came here in 1961, and I think Roble pretty strongly still resembled what Judith Case described from the 50s. We did have curfews, a certain number of 2:30s that we could use at different times during the quarter, a little allocation of that, and yeah, so, and signing in and out at the front door. I have some vivid memories about the physical structure of the building. I was not by any means in a triple. I was in what was known as a double single, which is at the time was a room outside the fire doors. This was at the A wing. And I think it had once been a single room, but we must have had a surge of women accepted that year because there was a bunk bed put in this single room. Yes, we did have a sink. That was the saving grace. But it didn't make for particularly easy integration into the spontaneous life of the floor. So we tried propping the door open as much as we could get away with, but it was a fire door, so it had to get shut at night. The other thing that I remember so vividly about that room was the communication system that we had in the early 60s. There were no phones in the room. There was a phone booth down the hall, and if you had an incoming call, the way you were told that you had a call was the buzzer on the wall would sound. The buzzer looked like a very old-fashioned light switch with a little sound. But in order to know whether it had gone off while you had dashed down to the showers, what the secret that was passed from class to class was to take a bobby pin and put a loop of thread through it and attach it to the buzzer. Then you would balance the bobby pin on the buzzer, and if it went off while you were out the room, when you came back, you would see the bobby pin hanging by the thread, still attached. So that was how you knew that somebody might have called. And you could go down to the front desk, and there might have been a message, usually in the code, MCWCB, man called, will call back, or or that more disappointing version, WCB. But so I was here in part. I grew up in this area, and so I was, as a high school senior, somewhat reluctant about the idea of not going farther away from home. But my mother had been here and had lived in Roble, in the same wing, and she took me to visit the campus, and that did it for me. So I think it's, for my family, we have a lot of Roble memories to share. A couple of them are gone. My mother was here, also lived in that same wing, as did an aunt, both of them in the 30s. My daughter was here, class of 86, and there was I think we have a kind of we came up in the world, because I think I was on the second floor. I think my aunt was on the first floor, and my mother and my daughter lived on the third floor. So we worked our way up over the generations. But I'm almost sure my aunt was on the first floor, because there were stories that my uncle, her husband from the 30s, actually had been in Roble too, but by climbing through the window. So
That's great.
So MCWCB, I'm not going to, that's better than LOL. Okay, so we're going to, listen, I'm looking at my watch, and if we're going to get you out of here when we said we have about 10 minutes. And I apologize, this is really unfair, but I want us to burn through the generations here, and then we'll see what time we have. But I want us to at least get a kind of historical arc of this place. So who's here from the 70s? Who was in the 70s? Okay, take no more than 2 minutes and tell us a bit.
Well, by the time I got here in '76, and Rick here was a hallmate of mine a year ahead, it was completely co-ed, but we still had the Bible suites, and I was an alum of Matthew, 77, 78 year. I was here for 4 years, and I was a nerd, mechanical and electrical engineering student, but of course this was really my home, and it allowed me to hang out with the liberal arts people, and we had a great production of Jesus Christ Superstar, and so that was 79, I guess it was, in spring of 79, and I was a member of the mob and that. But there was actually a famous debate here, and I'm trying to think, it was because Dean and Dave Haskin, who were the resident fellows, their children were adopted Native American, and we had quite a number of Native American students. And of course, early, what was it, 70, 71, when we changed from the Indian back to the cardinal, there was still a constant agitation to bring back the Indian as the mascot. And Prince Lightfoot, who was from a tribe up in far northern California, used to, in the 60s, come down and put a hex on at the beginning of the game, put a hex on the opposing team. And so he and his family came down, and there was a debate between the Native American students in Roble and their leadership and Prince Lightfoot and his family about whether there should be this restoration and what it meant. And it was I found it quite compelling, even as somebody who'd gone to my first Stanford game in '65.
Shayna? Okay, go ahead.
So this was, it was quite a compelling event, and it was after, I think, a UCLA game, is my recollection.
What class were you?
I was class of 80.
80. So you're 76 to 80.
Yeah.
77 to 80. Yeah.
And so, but the other thing you mentioned was about it being sort of the anti-Greek.
Yeah.
Well, that was still I think very much the mentality here, is that the Greek system was on the wane on campus, but the Roble and I think Toyon were very much communities that had like a strong identity and an identity around actually eating here. And actually, it grieves me that there's no longer meal service in the dorm. I can tell other stories, but
we'll come back. So listen, thank you. Shayna we're making her late for something important, but I want her to take 2 minutes, because Shayna spent hours and hours and hours working with Laura, looking through photographs of Roble. And Some of her work is out there, and she did a lot of winnowing. But I just want to take 2 minutes and sort of talk about maybe about your impressions about sort of what was there and what wasn't there and what was interesting to you.
Hi, guys.
Hi.
Sorry, I have EMT class in like 8 minutes, so how's it going? Well, when I was given this project, I was really excited because I love Roble. Like, I was not one of the freshmen who was assigned Roble and was really disappointed because that is a common theme now because people want to live in all freshman dorms. But I remember touring and seeing Roble and wanting to live here because I'm from Princeton, New Jersey, and it reminded me of Princeton with the Ivy. And I remember walking in here and seeing the columns, and I was struck by, like, they just looked historical, and I knew that there had to be this really rich history. And so when Jeff and Becky proposed this project, I was so excited, and so I got to look through all of the yearbooks. And unfortunately, I ran out of time, so I only looked through half of them, so I went every other year. So I'm sorry if your photos were in the yearbooks and didn't end up on the wall. I have hundreds of them. I guess I was really struck because living here, you know that it's an old building, and some people begrudgingly know it's an old building, but I thought it was so special that I got to see kind of pictures and images that just captured people's Stanford experiences, because you know that that was just one moment, but in that moment, that might have defined someone's Stanford experience. So I know someone, I don't know where you were, mentioned the dining halls, and seeing that this room was a dining hall, and then the Makerspace was a dining hall, and knowing that, you don't know, like someone might have had a 3-hour conversation that I know have a log with someone, one of my friends, and knowing that that is such a fundamental part of my Stanford experience, and knowing that someone else had that in this very room years and years and years ago. And it was just so wonderful to be able to kind of learn about those stories just from these snapshots and know that so many people's experiences at Stanford were defined by this dorm that I now have the privilege of living in last year and this year and hopefully next year and the following year. I want to live here for 4 years because it's just such a special place, and whether or not the 300 people who now live here know that or not, I think that there is just this essence when you walk into this building that you know that all of you have kind of made this place what it was and what it is and what it will be, and that everyone who lives here now kind of is adding to that story that Roble has. And things that I noticed, there was a lot of non-racial diversity in all of the photos. It was kind of very frustrating because in the yearbooks they didn't even mention how the ethnic-themed dorms were put here. I really liked hearing the story of the earthquake and how they kicked 294 people out. Like, and you know that that really was not fun for the people who lived here. But it was interesting to see. And yeah, I guess it was just interesting to see the traditions, because we now have our own traditions, but it was fascinating to see the previous traditions and the ones that we still keep and the ones that maybe in 10, 20 years will still be here. So it's been a privilege. Thank you for giving me a project. I'm going to run to class and learn how to save people's lives.
Excellent. Thank you. Okay, so 80s, 1980s, right there. Oh, you need a microphone. Here you go. Here.
My name is Elaine Listner. I was here 86 to 87 with the Porteouses, right above them, and I think you had a doggy in the yard. And I'm Jeannie Sigmund's daughter, so my mother and grandmother and great aunt were here, and great uncle apparently through the window. And one quick thumbs up, one quick thumbs down, and 2 quick memories. The thumbs down would be, actually, I found Roble to be too big to be really a cohesive social center. And it was really our Western culture class with 12 people. Those are the people I'm still friends with now. And they were all in our dorm, so I think that came together because you'd see them again. But those are the people I still know. Thumbs up is, I think the quads are just a civilized way to house people. I guess in the very beginning they were one young woman in a sitting room, but by the time I was here, it was 2 bunk beds and dressers, 2 bunk beds and dressers, and a desk room. And that's really humane because you can be awake and study and then get away and sleep. So I've always thought that I felt sorry for people who went off to college and had to just be jammed in with one person in one room, and then you just have to make it work. Quick memory, we were I was at Hammarskjöld House later on, the International House, and we were hosted by Roble after the earthquake in the basement laundry room. So that was kind of heartwarming after spending the first night in the foothills. And the other memory is from 1986, getting here, and it was the beginning of the AIDS crisis, and very vivid memories of hitting us hard with education. Being in this room right out here and having the resident assistants tossing out condoms to the room. And, you know, I mean, we were young and inexperienced, a lot of us, and we were putting them on doorknobs here and playing with them. But it broke down that barrier, and it got us thinking and talking, because San Francisco was not far away. And I think, thank you for probably saving some lives. So.
Thank you. This is inherently unfair, but we're going to keep going through 1990s.
Hello, my name's Ben, and I was actually in Roble for 4 years, from 96 through 2000. And my freshman year was the last year that this was a dining hall. And I have lots of great memories of hanging out in here and eating with people, despite the fact that the food was known across campus as being one of the worst. But it had the upside that around midnight to 1 a.m. or so, we would often break into the kitchen and go get out some cheese and tortillas, make some quesadillas, like fire up the stove, and like clean everything up so they wouldn't know. I'm sure they knew, though. And then another fun thing, I was an RA my final year, and we used to have weekly barbecues. And in spring, some friends and I started running them on a raft in the middle of a full Lake Lagunita. And we had a big raft out there. It was probably 12 by 12 feet. And barbecue sitting on there, like just a little Weber grill. And people would take boats and ferry back and forth to come out and get stuff.
When did the lake lose its water?
It was on and off for a bunch of years. And it's been off now for ages, right?
Yeah. Does anyone have any less rosy memories, but important ones?
Can I say something about the earthquake? Because that was pretty traumatic. We learned from Dean Lyons during exam week in 87? 89.
89.
This is 87.
Oh, 87, because it wasn't the earthquake.
It wasn't the earthquake. It was about the closure before the earthquake.
Exactly,
Sorry.
it's the closure before the earthquake.
Yeah, so we learned during exam week at the end of first quarter that this dorm was not as sturdy and stable and did not have all those rebars that it was supposed to have in that cement, that we were going to have to evacuate the dorm. And the hope is that we could keep that from the students and announce it. Norm was involved in this, and announce it over the break through a letter that they would be not coming back to their rooms. But unfortunately, there was some class where a professor knew about this and announced it to the class by saying she or he, I forget who it was very sorry to hear that the Roble students would not be returning to their dorm. Well, that then created chaos for those students for that quarter, and they were allowed to stay and finish their exams, but that was pretty traumatic. And then Evan and I spent the break trying to place 294 students around campus that was already jammed with students to have to put these students on campus somewhere. So it was pretty traumatic. And then we came back the year they finished putting rebar in and building those big cement, now they're rooms, I guess, right? These cement column rooms. And it was 1 month after we moved back in that the earthquake hit. And the guardian angels from New York were here giving a talk, and they were coming up to the dorm when the earthquake hit, and they saw the building literally go, which was exactly what they thought the fix was supposed to do, so that the cement floors wouldn't pancake down. And so the building is still standing.
Thank you. Jim, Laura, do you want to say anything by way of wrap up?
I think there's another, one more.
Go ahead. Yeah.
So I'm Norm Robinson, and I had a little something to do with Res Ed in those days. But I just wanted to add one thing to what Ann said, and it goes to the ingenuity and the curiosity of Stanford students, because the way that we found out that Roble did not have reinforced concrete tying the floors to the walls was a student who had been searching through archives, and he saw a photo of Roble, I think under construction, but anyway, he saw that what he thought were solid concrete floors not tied into hollow clay tile walls. And so this student came into my office to point this out to me, and of course I'm not an engineer, I had no idea really what I was talking about, but I sent him over to Gene, your office, I forget what it was called. But anyway, that started the process of discovering that in the kind of earthquake that we had in '89, had we not done the retrofit, chances are that the walls would have collapsed and the floors would have pancaked, and who knows how much loss of life there was. So it's really thanks to a Stanford student that that problem was discovered and repaired in time to avoid a disaster.
Wow. So my thought about this is we will not only get your email addresses, so please make sure you sign the sheet, but we should set up a student project, right?
Yeah.
And have people conduct interviews, the Stanford
Oral
Archives,
history
the
of Roble, yeah.
Stanford Historical Society. So we'll be in touch. Because I feel like we've only barely scratched the surface here, but it's been dazzling.
So listen, give us 90 more seconds and pull out a pen or pull out a phone and take down a couple pieces of information. Because I'm certain that some of you have not signed the legal pad. That sounds very ominous. But we really, really, really want to stay in touch. And this goes for those of you in the other room. So if you can grab the pad before you go, please do. If you can't, I'm going to give you 2 email addresses. The first one is roblesustainability@stanford.edu. ROBLE, and then the word sustainability, no punctuation, at stanford.edu. If that, for instance, for some reason doesn't work, I can't believe I'm doing this, but my email address is jeffball@stanford.edu, JEFFBALL, no punctuation, at stanford.edu. Please, 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 you don't have to write a long note. Just let us know who you are and when you were here, and we're going to assume if you send us something that you'd like to stay in touch, we absolutely will be back in touch. I think, does anyone who's standing here know about our Facebook thing where people can post photos and memories? Leslie, do you know, or do we have any? I thought we had some sort of a Facebook.
Yeah, I know. I think Quincy knows more about it than I do, but I don't see him here.
We don't have. All right, well, I'll tell you what. If you send us your addresses, we'll get back to you in a way that we can have some kind of ongoing community, which would be really wonderful. So I just want to say, one other person's going to come up here before we dismiss you. I want to say thank you, thank you, thank you again to Jim and Laura. I have learned a ton from the 2 of them, from you. I cannot imagine what it is going to be like to walk into the dining hall tonight and watch the faces of Roble's current students who have had a chance to listen to this. So you've really done a service. Thank you, thank you. Thank you, thank you. And Leslie, you wanted to come up and say something, I believe, yeah?
Yes, real quick. Well, first of all, let's give Jeff and Jim and Laura a great round of applause. Thank you all so much. As a former Roble resident myself, I was here in 1996 to 98, so actually Ben and I overlapped a bit. I was a resident in what are now called the basement rooms. They were underground, but back then we called it the penthouse. And we also had the Bibles.
Still call it the penthouse.
They still call it the penthouse. But I was here during the fateful winter of 96 to 97, which was, or was it 97 to 98, when El Nino hit. And Lake Log, every day I would walk from class by Lake Log on my way to my room in the basement and look at the water level, because there was a water level marker, and the lake was rising, 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 rising. And one day I woke up and I got out of bed and I put my feet on the floor and my carpet was just completely soaking wet. It didn't flood, but there was clearly a crack in the foundation, and only my room, of all the rooms in that hall, was essentially waterlogged. And so fortunately, a girl had just moved out of a beautiful single and two center, and I got it. So I have both stressful memories and also really positive memories of Roble. But I just want to say a huge, huge thank you. I know Jeff has thanked a bunch of people already, but really without Jeff and especially Becky, wherever she is, and the efforts of also several of the residents, the student staffers who volunteered, Quincy, who really helped with a lot of the organization of the AV and all of this, this event would not have been possible. I want to say a special thanks to all of you in the audience who are members of the Stanford Historical Society. So on behalf of the Historical Society, thank you so much for attending and for joining. If you aren't a member, or if you've never even heard of us and you just came here for stories about Roble, we put on programs like this, usually about once a month during the academic year, and we explore all kinds of stories and explore history about Stanford, and we often learn some incredible things by doing that. So there's some information. There's a little black tablecloth covered table out there with some pamphlets. I encourage you to take them, or you can just go to our website, which is historicalsociety.stanford.edu, and I encourage you to join. I know Charlotte's going to be out there, and she's giving away these beautiful tote bags, which are not for sale. You can only get them if you become a member. I think our next program, let's see, it is October now, so November we are doing a special program on student activism, the history of student activism at Stanford. So that should be really exciting. So that is also on our website. So again, thank you all. Thank you, Jeff. Thank you, Laura and Jim. And thank you, everyone. I think we might have, I know that the advertised reception, which didn't end up happening, and Whole Foods apologized profusely, there may be a few nibbles that are left out in the lounge, so we encourage you to go out there. We encourage you to look at the photos that Shayna put up. They're on the corkboard out there if you haven't seen them, and you can linger and continue to share stories. But thank you all for coming, and have a great evening.
If you wait 30 seconds, we'll have Roble Living Laboratory for Sustainability at Stanford stickers for you, which you may take. Give me 30 seconds to go get the stack, and I'll put them out there, and please take one. Thank you so much for coming. Thanks, Leslie.